Romania just tried to have a presidential election. They elected a guy for president. The EU didn't like that. They didn't like that one bit. His name was Kalin Georgescu. They really didn't like him being elected. So the EU put pressure on Romania. The Romanian court overturned the election. And then another Romanian election authority, one of these, post-communist kind of structures came in and ruled that Georgescu can't even run for president again. So they've stripped him from the ballot. And remember, that's what they were trying to do to President Trump here in the United States.
The European Union, the largely unelected bureaucracy in Brussels, is meddling in Romania's elections. And it's all because a conservative populist candidate was poised to win. Sound familiar? Well, it should, because this is straight out of the same playbook we saw with President Trump in the United States. And this is what globalists are going to try to do in every election around the globe that populist conservatives are projected to win. We're seeing it in France with Marine Le Pen, Germany with the AfD, and most recently with Romania. Now, as many of you know, Romania held a presidential election back in November of 2024, and Kalin Georgescu, a pro-Trump populist Orthodox traditionalist, shocked the establishment by winning the first round with 23% of the vote. I mean, he literally came out of nowhere. The establishment media in Romania never gave him the time of day. And so not only did he shock the clueless establishment by winning the first round of presidential elections, but all the polls were showing that he would easily win the second round and thus become president of Romania. And so the establishment panicked. And the Romanian Constitutional Court, under pressure from EU elites in Brussels, stepped in and canceled the entire election, claiming that the democratic integrity of the election was polluted, I kid you not, by Russian interference. They're not even creative at this point. They would later arrest Georgescu and ban him for running for president. But it so happens life is filled with irony. Another populist, George Simeon, stepped up to carry the torch. Simeon's with the Alliance for the Union of Romanians. They've been called the MAGA of Romania. He's anti-EU overreach. He opposes sending endless weapons to Ukraine. And he is a staunch defender of Romanian tradition and sovereignty. And guess what? He crushed it. He won 40% of the vote in their latest round of presidential elections, almost double what Georgescu got before. Now, Simeon's headed off to run off against, frankly, a pathetic pro-EU sellout, and the establishment is sweating bullets. But, as you know, this is all par for the course in the rise of a new civilizationalist populism. Hungary's Viktor Orban, Italy's Giorgia Meloni, Geert Wilders of the Netherlands, the Sweden Democrats, the Austrian Freedom Party, the AfD in Germany, now the #1 party in Germany, Vox in Spain, Chega in Portugal. They're all populist uprisings standing up for nation, culture, custom, and tradition. And obviously, the globalist elites in Brussels can't stand it. But it's too late. There's nothing they can do ultimately to stop it. Joining us today is our good friend Jack Posobiec of Human Events Daily, Salem Media, and Real America's Voice. And Jack actually just came back from Romania, where he interviewed who I'm sure we're going to be calling the president of Romania, George Simeon. Jack, welcome back. Great to see you again, my friend.
Well, Dr. Turley, it's great to be back, and I've really only been in here in the U.S. for a couple of days. I was at the Papal Conclave, which ended early, as everyone saw, much to the surprise of many. And while I was there, I said, it's only about a 2-hour flight over to Bucharest from Rome, and had already. I had actually traveled to Bucharest a year prior to meet, believe it or not, with the AUR party and George Simeon. They had held this huge sort of, they were calling it the Make Europe a Great Again conference. And so we had met with him, and I spoke and gave a talk about many of the same things that you're talking about here, and sort of talking about what our plans were to hopefully win in 2024 in the United States, which we did do. And then as this was all going on, here we are a year later, and George had no idea a year ago that he would be the one in the driver's seat for the presidency of his own country. By the way, 38 years old. He's 38 years old. And I can confirm one of the things that's gone quite viral from our meeting was he was posting TikToks from our meeting. And one thing that so they go viral in Romania. They're up on the news media as I'm watching, sort of their equivalent of CNN International and things like that. And there I am on TikTok with the presidential candidate. And I said something in our interview as well. I said, George, I don't know if people realize this. You're making these TikToks yourself on your own phone and throwing the music and the captions, and you're reading the comments, and he's interacting with people. He said, yeah. I'm not some guy who needs staff to do that. It really, and I can sit here and I'm telling you. So those comments and the commentary of using social media, something I think that can break beyond the traditional, left-right partisanship, but also something that ties into everything that we were talking about, because he said, look, this is how we disintermediate the globalist controlled media, by going directly to the voters. And the voters, by the way, absolutely love it. So this is something that, of course, we saw President Trump pioneer all the way back in 2016. It's something that myself on Twitter, now X, yourself on YouTube and other platforms, and now with the rise of Rumble, we're just seeing it more and more, that the politicians who know where the people are, who understand where the pulse is, they don't need polls. They don't need to go out and meet with people to figure out. They can talk to them every single day on social media, and they can exactly. And by the way, you can A/B test things. You can say, oh, this is something that's going over well. People like this, or oh, people don't like that idea. Don't do any more of that. That was a bad. I mean, you see President Trump do this all the time, by the way. Say, how does he know the pulse of the people? Because he's constantly asking them questions and listening. And I saw the exact same behavior and the exact same really talent exemplified by George Simeon. And it's something that I think that probably so many people were missing out on, but just me observing this, and of course being a voracious user of social media myself, there are worse things to be addicted to. All right, that's all I'll say in my own defense. Of all the addictions out there, it's probably one of the best ones. But no, it's clearly something where it stands to be said. Where I believe, and I'll have to double check this, but he may be the first millennial or elder millennial, Gen Y, I'm not sure which one we're going with, leader in all of Europe.
Wow. That'd be so amazing. You said 38, right? 38 years old. Amazing. You and I were in Harrisburg talking about the rise of the new media. And, I came across actually an article. I'll have to send it to you sometime, because you're really making me think about it. And the article was fascinating. It's basic. It starts with a question. How did the MMA replace boxing as the people's sport? So boxing has this wonderful populist element to it, the Irish Catholic, the Cinderella story, fighting from the slums, as it were, Cinderella Man and so forth. But now that's gone. I mean, Don King basically killed boxing. Now it's MMA, UFC. But one of the arguments that this person gives, his thesis, is that it was social media. MMA stars all had their own social media accounts. They spoke directly with their fans. The fans got to interact with them. Whereas, the fighter was they were back in the 1990s with pay-per-view. And of course, UFC still got their pay-per-view, but it's a whole different vibe than professional boxing today. And so I just seems to be the same thing.
It's funny you mention that, because I happen to know that they were trying to, I don't know if they still do this, and I don't really watch it, but I have some insight into this world. In the professional wrestling world, they have all these new belts now, and so it used to be there's the heavyweight champion and the intercontinental champion. That was it. Well, they had a belt, and the name escapes me, and it's going to kill me off the top of my head, and my producer's going to kill me for not knowing it, because he's huge into that world. But it was sort of it was a social media belt almost, where you could be, if you held this belt, you could be challenged 24/7 for the belt by anyone. So isn't it great? So you could come up to someone in a parking lot or in an apartment, and if you see you could be going up against a big guy, 6'8", 300 pounds, whatever, Glenn Jacobs type guy. But I love it from the perspective of it's that, as you say, it's that interactivity between the audience and the performer, the audience and the athlete who's in the ring, and now the audience aka the constituent and the leader, which is something, by the way, if you go all the way back to the American founding fathers, that's what this is about. I've talked so many times about how Thomas Paine and the writing of Common Sense and Benjamin Franklin running the printing press, what were they doing? They were going viral. They controlled the means of distribution. They controlled the means of communication. That's how these ideas were able to be distributed. And you would have the plates of Thomas Paine's Common Sense. You'd go from press to press and you'd be running them off wherever you could, and then you'd go throughout taverns and say, well, that's the exact same thing that we're doing today. The technology is a little bit different, but the idea is the same, that when you democratize information, then you can share this. Now, by the way, what does that mean? That means that the information has to stand on its own, whether it's supported or unsupported. It depends on where the people are at, but it's going to be much, much closer to the will of the people than it is to the will of whatever despot or tyrant is trying to control everything. The establishment.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, that's brilliantly put. And again, just you want to compare the two. Look at UFC right now on fire. Look at boxing. I don't even know if they have championships. I know they do, but nobody's watching them anymore. That's for sure. I think it's the same thing. The establishment's the old Don King boxing structure, and we're the UFC. Are you more than I? Like I said, I valiantly hide behind children. So
I have to throw out since you mentioned it, one of the people who was both integral in the world of boxing, but also to the rise of UFC, because when UFC first started, they didn't have the weight classes, and it was sort of this blood sport kind of thing, and Senator McCain was very against it, and to be fair, it probably went a little bit too far in some of those early days where you've got like a 400-pound guy up against a 125-pound guy. It's okay. There might be some point to that, but they couldn't get insurance from any of the fight promoters, and who was one of the first people that came out to underwrite the insurance and have it be held at his establishments was Donald J. Trump.
Absolutely, you're right.
And that's why you see so many of the fighters and Dana White have always stood by him, because he stood by them.
Yeah, he's had a front row seat in both. That's right, the Don King years and now the new populist Dana White years. Absolutely. So give us a sense. Gang, we have links down below. You definitely want to check out this interview that Jack did with the new president, soon to be president of Romania, Simeon. Georgia Simeon, can you give us what was your experience with him, and what did you guys chat about, and I mean, what's going on in Romanian politics from your vantage point?
Well, what's incredible. So I mentioned how we talked about social media and something we really connected on. But originally the way that we had known each other was both being supporters of this burgeoning populist nationalist movement, whereby we are eschewing the tendrils and the shackles of the globalist system. Now, in Europe, you have the EU as this extra governmental organization, extra national organization, whereas in the US we don't have EU membership, and yet we still feel many of these same pressures. And of course you see this in the tariff fights, you see this in the refugee fights in many of these cases, like the South Africans being attacked because why? Well, we're not allowed to bring people who have any ties directly to our civilization. No, we have to bring extra civilizational people in. And
they're saying the Democrats finally found refugees they don't like.
Right. That's right. People who are actually facing horrific. We just interviewed someone on Human Events Daily from South Africa who was telling us he's a scholar there, Dr. Ernst Roots, and he was talking about just personal stories from his family of people he knew who had been murdered in horrific ways out on these farms, and yet the mainstream media wouldn't want to talk about it at all.
Talking about shooting the boar and all. It's crazy,
Right, and so it's absolutely horrific, and he's a government official. Right, this isn't some rapper with a song. Right? He's a government official, and so what we also discussed were these ideas that the EU had been pushing, not only for changes for folks who understand this, Romania as a civilizational force. They are a Christian state. They are an Orthodox Christian country. They have fought off Muslim encroachment and invasion for hundreds of years, by the way. Vlad Tepes, of course, is a national figure there, someone who and there are portraits of him all over in the nationalist, populist areas. To folks, so folks who don't understand this, here in the West, we think of, Vlad the Impaler. I mean, that guy, he's Dracula, and he's associated with Bram Stoker and all this. But if you actually learn the true story, he was, in fact, a Christian fighting the Ottoman Empire from taking over Eastern Europe on the eastern flank of the bulwarks of Christendom. And someone who has been, they would say, over there, they would say he did what he had to do to defend his country and to defend Christendom. And there are many people still in Romania today that believe that. Romania, of course, which suffered under a horrific, one of the most brutal communist regimes of the 20th century that's ever existed. And Ceausescu, someone who he and his wife were both executed
the only ones
after the Romanian Revolution, I believe 1989, off the top of my head. And something where a people that have absolutely just faced horrific, nightmarish horrors and risen up against them, and in not even that long ago, within all of our lifetimes, these things have existed. And there's so much to go through in that regime, and even some of the brutal prison experiments and other experiments that were held there that can pull out the true psychology of what I wrote in my book. It is unhuman. It is absolutely unhuman. And so capitalizing on all that, they've really gotten to this idea where this is absolutely a backlash to the overturning of the first election, in so much as, and here's what I'll tell you, this is breaking news as I have even went to, just got back, I didn't even know he was going to do this. So they're so sure of themselves in Romania that last I saw, George Simeon has actually left Romania. And he has gone up. So there's an interesting dynamic that's going on now where Romania and Poland both have presidential elections on the same day.
Yes, I saw them campaigning together. Yes.
And so he's flown to Poland to campaign for the candidate in Poland who's
the Law and Justice Party.
There's the Law and Justice Party, the other populist nationalist party, which is currently in power, yet the current president, Duda, is term limited out. Yeah. So the new Nawrocki, who is a historian and anti-communist, by the way, who is anti-communist and anti-fascist, which, as Poland goes, is pretty typical for the course there. They're campaigning together, and they are presenting this as a united front with Orban, by the way, in Hungary, to stand against globalism, and saying, come fight with us, and we will fight for our countries to maintain our unique Christian identities, our unique cultural identities. And it's very interesting, by the way, because as someone who has Polish descent, there are lots of territorial and historical issues for hundreds of years between Hungary, Poland, Romania, Slovakia, all of the neighbors. And yet, for once, you're actually seeing all of these guys on the same side against Brussels, because they have a common foe, which is something where even last year, even just as not to spill too much of the tea, as they say, but even last year there were tensions between some of these various movements that I was, going to different events and talking to people, and they say, oh, don't talk to those guys, you shouldn't talk to these guys, and that's all gone. That's all gone out the window because Brussels has gone way too far. And what people need to understand about Poland and Romania that's so absolutely crucial, and Hungary, what do they all share in common? An eastern border with Ukraine. These are the key military, economic, and migrant lines and refugee lines between NATO Europe and Ukraine itself. This is why the globalists are so focused on these countries, to make sure that they get someone in who is pliable, who is on board with what we call Project Ukraine, because they want to keep this going as much as possible. And yet you hear President Trump there in Riyadh saying this era is over. The era of nation building, the era of us going everywhere and telling people what to do is over. There was a fantastic line that he gave, which is directed the heart of, yes, it's a backhanded shot at George W. Bush, but it's even at Bush, where he was talking about there's this there's this view that the role of the American president is to look into the eyes of foreign powers and then to judge them on their sins. And which, of course, is a reference to what George W. Bush had said about Vladimir Putin about 20 years ago. But what was so interesting is Trump then responded, he said, no, it is God's job to sit in judgment. It is my job to defend America. And this is a complete repudiation of the neoconservative ideology right there, is to say my job is to defend America. My job is not to go and judge these countries, whether it be Syria, whether it be whatever country it is, and we can all go down the list of inequalities and injustices in those countries. And by the way, I'm sure they could turn right around and say the same thing about the United States. And yet that's not the job of the U.S. president. I remember there was something where years ago where I remember President Trump being pushed on some issue revolving, I want to say it was probably the Kurds in northern Syria, and this idea of, well, what's to be done about the Kurds and what will be done, what's the plan? And President Trump responded, he said, you know, I'm not the king of Syria. I'm not the king of Syria. I'm not. I'm the president of the United States of America. These 350 million people, this is my charge. This is my duty. This is my responsibility. I don't have a responsibility to those people. Do we have interest? Do we have economic? Sure, understood. But my duty and my responsibility and my obligation is key. My obligation stops at the borders and coastlines of the United States of America.
What do you think? Do you think there's so obviously Simeon feels very confident right now. The polls, from what I've seen, looks like it's going to be pretty brutal for the globalists. Do you see Brussels, or do you see the Romanian establishment pulling anything comparable to what they did with Georgescu?
I asked this question, and he said, here's the main difference is this, was that when consider the timeline here, when Georgescu's election was overturned, that was under the Biden administration. That's when USAID was still humming. That's when Joe Biden was still in power. That's when Tony Blinken was running things on the international scene. Samantha Power was someone who was spending a lot of time in Eastern Europe, just like George Soros, who, by the way, a lot of people miss this, got his start in Hungary. And the Open Society program was founded in Hungary and in Eastern Europe. That's why it has its tentacles in so many, Bucharest and so many of these places. Now, what they're telling me is that they've been receiving pressure from Marco Rubio, the current Secretary of State, as well as the U.S. State Department writ large, to say we are carefully monitoring the Romanian elections and we expect them to be free and fair, which is nothing like anything you heard from the Biden administration. So they're really crediting this. And by the way, they're not asking for any special favors. They're not asking for any, ideological fellow traveler, fast pass or something like that. No, they just want a fair election and that the will of the people be held. And by the way, for folks who want to go, but not to relitigate the whole thing, but the original election of Kalin Georgescu in the first place, there was no election interference or election tampering or any issues with the election integrity whatsoever. And yet the Supreme Court overturned it on grounds of TikTok.
The Russians manipulated the algorithm of TikTok. They claim
that Russians manipulated the algorithm of TikTok, but they never actually said that there were problems with the votes or the voting system whatsoever. The votes were all real.
It's an admission.
And they never even made that. It was a complete admission. It was a complete and utter admission. And this is why I believe George Simeon is getting, and I'll just have to say, I remember the last days of the height of the Trump campaign when every song on TikTok was about Trump, and every trend and every video and going to McDonald's and driving the garbage truck, these viral images were going like crazy. And the energy was off the charts. That same energy is the energy that I saw when I was in Romania spending the day with George Simeon and his campaign and his team, because we conducted the interview, we went out for dinner later. People are coming up to him at the restaurant with their children, asking to take selfies. They're showing me the viral TikTok videos and rappers, even gypsy rappers, it's Romania. They have gypsy rappers doing songs about him, and the chorus is George Simeon, George Simeon, and it's like these chants and these different and different rock and hip hop and all the different genres, and there's a lot of hope riding on it. I remember saying to them, I said, well, like President Trump has found out, the election, as it turns out, the election, once you win the election, it isn't over, because it turns out that once you win an election, you actually have to do the job.
Yes,
and so
exactly.
This is something where you mentioned, I remember we were mentioning Maloney a little bit before, and so Giorgia Maloney is someone that he is already allied with prior to this, so they are planning to potentially hold some meetings soon here in Rome. We know that he, of course, is in Poland. Now, Poland, by the way, so there's a little bit of a switch up. Even though their elections are on the same day, Poland does also have that 2-round system. So Poland will have a second round.
Okay.
Right, so Poland will have a second round of their election on June 1st, so about 2 weeks' time after the 18th. So it very well could be that some of George Simeon's first acts as the president of Romania could be to go to Poland and campaign for Karol Nawrocki, and it's just amazing to see for someone. I've spent a lot of time in this part of the world. My family hails from this part of the world, and I've spent obviously a lot of my career here in the U.S. trying to build this populist nationalist movement. And I've said it's always ironic that in order to fight globalism effectively, we require an international alliance of anti-globalists.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is
the internationalization of the nationalist right. Exactly.
Right. It's quite ironic, palpable, absolutely palpable irony, and yet it's true, because I've gone all over the world and talked about these things. I've gone, and I don't mean this to brag, but I mean this to describe the situation. I've gone to Mexico City and I've talked about this. I've gone to Tokyo and I've said the exact same thing, because we're all facing the same threats from Brussels and their partners in the Chinese Communist Party in Zhongnanhai of Beijing.
Yeah, populism is the new lingua franca. I did the same thing when I was in Cancun. I was our Uber driver. We started talking about politics, and we started, and I went directly to populist politics, and boy, did we knock sparks off each other. Because again,
I've got a great Uber driver anecdote. So I go to New York City for I believe the first arraignment of President Trump, the very first one, the Alvin Bragg and the Stormy Daniels. Nobody even remembers these things, but I'm there. I remember all the hoopla and people saying it was very dangerous. You shouldn't go. You shouldn't hold a demonstration. We held it anyway. And Gavin Wax and Bishborough, Marjorie Taylor Greene came down, and I'm out there, and we're standing on a bench with a bullhorn doing the whole thing. And I leave, and I take the Uber out, and he's done his arraignment, and they block off all of Fifth Avenue. President Trump comes down from the tower. And then so I leave, and I go out in the Uber, and he said, "What's all this about?" And I said, "Oh, well, Trump was in, and he had the arraignment." And my Uber driver says to me, he says, "You know who they should be arresting? Victoria Nuland."
I love
what?
Wow.
The Uber driver. He was Armenian, and he starts going off about
he knows
Victoria
the
Nuland
USAID
and the
he knows
globalists
Kiev
and USAID, and this type of stuff is actually well known in the rest of the world. It's very well known. It's just, unfortunately, most Americans, we are the ones propagandized. We make fun of North Korea, but guess what? We're the North Korea because of what our media does to us.
Good point. We were absolutely clueless. I can't even count the amount of people who look at me now who were good, neocon Bush voters and so forth. As I was back in the day, it's the only thing I knew was either Bush or Kerry. Well, of course I'm going with Bush.
Hey, you think that's bad? I joined the intelligence community.
But you're brilliant whatever you do. But yeah, I've had so many come and tell me, if you had told me 8 years ago that there was a deep state and this administrative state that's really running things, and so I would have called you a conspiracy theorist, blah blah blah. Now they're all true believers because we're all seeing it now. It's for everyone seeing it. It's absolutely crazy. Jack, before you go, I did want to get your take on, because you witnessed history at the Vatican, and every new papacy is history, but this is a sort of like double history here with the first American Prevost, now Leo the 14th. You are a devout trad Catholic, and I know there were some concerns originally about Prevost. But it does appear he's actually, in contrast to Francis, rather pro-trad from what I'm getting, particularly very pro-Latin Mass. I was really curious in your take.
Well, it's like any Catholic, like the Pope is the Pope, and certainly we respect that, and I absolutely respect that. There's no question that I accept that he is the Pope, and he has received and I was there for the first time in my life. I couldn't believe it as a kid who grew up in the Archdiocese of Philadelphia, going to, I can't imagine my nuns if they could only see me there, standing in St. Peter's with the white smoke billowing. It's something that's only happened about 276 times in all of history. It is absolutely historic, and having the opportunity to go, even with my brother, was incredible. And I remember I was laughing at my mom, thinking about all those times that she was yelling at us to get our clothes ready for on Sunday morning and drag ourselves out of bed or whatever it is to get to church.
Look at me now, Mom.
Yeah, right, exactly. And my brother, believe it or not, I was sort of manning the field desk that we had come up with, but we even got him a pass to go all the way to the top of the St. Peter, so he's looking out over the square. I said, my gosh, my kid brother's up there, And but with Prevost, look, I can appreciate that he is making some olive branches to the traditional Catholic movement. I appreciate that, and I'm very open to that. But at the same time, I've seen his Twitter account, and those tweets are all still up attacking J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States. I certainly hope that J.D. will have the opportunity to meet the Pope very soon, and attacking President Trump, particularly on this issue of illegal immigration, something that is quite frankly the #1 issue for the United States, because as you talked about before, because of the rise of the civilization state, the way that you dilute a civilization is by literally diluting the demographics of the population that is there. This was what led to one of the key factors that led to the end of the Roman Empire. This is a key factor in terms of imperial overstretch that has led to the end of British Empire too, by the way, for that same token. And so when we see this issue, above all issues, politically speaking, this is one where I do have a lot of pause, and I think that we really do need to make sure that that President Trump, who, by the way, won the Catholic vote in 2024 while talking about these issues, particularly in my home state of Pennsylvania, as well as in Wisconsin and Michigan, where the Catholic swing from Joe Biden to Trump really was the margin of victory. I think it's something where I would say I'm more in line with the Pope's brother down in Florida, and I've been reading some of his posts and saying, gosh, and so I've actually come out and said, I've said, here's where I'm at. I would be more than happy to personally sponsor from Human Events Daily the travel, full accommodations of the Pope's brother to fly to Rome, to spend some time with his brother, and have some good conversations on these issues.
Be the primary advisor to the papacy,
perhaps
the Holy See.
A special envoy, if you will.
A special envoy, absolutely. Yeah, he's already got it in with him, so absolutely. Jack, we've got some links down below. I love your X account, but is there anywhere else that you would like people to check out your work?
Well, of course, Human Events Daily is available on Apple Podcasts and Spotify until they ban us. The book that I've written, as a New York Times bestseller, was a #1 Publishers Weekly, Unhumans, The Secret History of Communist Revolutions and How to Crush Them. This is a book that the quote-unquote respectable centrists do not want you to read, because we actually advocate using fire to fight fire and using power to, in fact, defeat the communists rather than just debate them.
I love it. You mean not ideology, just libertarian ideology?
Well, as it turns out, communism is not an ideology, it's a tactic.
It's a tactic. I love it. Absolutely. Jack, you're awesome. You always got a home here anytime you want, and we'll have you back whenever you're available really soon. So everybody, make sure you click on the links below. Stay afresh of Jack's daily work. It's absolutely amazing. You're the best, man. At amazing times, especially in Poland, Romania, absolutely incredible time. And here at home, amazing stuff.
God bless, Dr. Turley.
God bless you, man.